Welcome to Climate Forward, the podcast where we explore the actions and stories of the European Climate Pact Ambassadors. My name is Mansour Philip Garabaghi, and I am your host. In this episode, I speak to Willem Grootonk. Willem is a European Climate Pact Ambassador, a former esports commentator, and was the chair of the Dutch Youth Environmental Council.
We want to share awareness about why it's important to involve youth. How do you do effective youth participation? Young people don't know the traditional ways of engaging with politics.
Willem Grootonk, welcome to the Climate Forward podcast.
Hello.
It's a pleasure to have you here with me today, and we will talk a lot about youth participation because that's a topic you know a lot about.
Yes, I do. And I'm really happy to be here to talk about that.
Willem, you are a European Climate Pact Ambassador.
Correct.
And since when have you joined the pact?
I joined in beginning of 2021 when Fons, the director of the Benelux Pact, approached my old board, the Jongerenmilieuraad, the Dutch Youth Environmental Council, to see if we were interested in joining. And then I initially joined representing my board, but I kind of stayed because I liked it and I found it an interesting way to kind of stay involved with the whole policy arena and just climate action in general.
So you joined from the Youth Participation Council, or what was that?
Yeah, so I used to be the chair of the Dutch Youth Environmental Council, or the Jongerenmilieuraad in Dutch. And it's an organization run by young people. And we work together with the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management to represent young people on topics related to the environment. So we did the stricter definition of environment in that, like soil, water, air quality. I did that for a year. I've left that since to do other things, but that's how I got to know the pact, and I'm really happy to be still involved. It's a very interesting organization.
I would like to stay with the topic of the Youth Participation Council. Can you? So it's working with the Ministry for the Environment in the Netherlands. Yeah. And what is the purpose of this council?
The council was originally founded because there was a certain desire from the ministry, specifically like the team. Like national environmental program, it's like future environmental policy for youth participation, but in a way that was balanced. So not necessarily from one viewpoint. And that's how during the Corona years, the Youth Environmental Council was really founded. We are in principle we're like an independent organization, so we don't work for the Infrastructure and Water Management Ministry, but they do give us some money. And we've been trying to develop like a good way of representing the opinions of young people and directly translating that to policy advice. So more at the policy level, so at ministry level, not necessarily at like politics level, like not necessarily lobbying, I would call it. And we focused on milieu because it's a bit of an underlit topic often. It's often forgotten about in contrast to the much more popular climate topic. Of course, they're massively interrelated.
And can you mention or share with us one or two things that you did during your time there?
Yeah, I think two of the most important projects that are not finished, it's still a work in progress. The first is the generation test. It's like the generatietoets in Dutch. And it's a proposed kind of mechanism to test new laws to see what kind of impact they have on future generations. And it's a broader movement. It's not just us. But we've been trying to make that work to kind of prevent legislation from offsetting current damages to future generations as a legal instrument. That's still very much in early phases, but that was very interesting to work on. And our second big project is a participation tool. It's like an app that aims to facilitate gathering opinions from young people, like a diverse group of young people, about environmental topics in a very accessible and non-government language way. So that's also been a really big project. I think it's almost done now. So we're actually going to schools to test it out. So yeah, those were the two main projects.
So it's a little bit about awareness raising for the the topics that young people would care about, but on the other hand, also making sure that young people are included in the things that are done on a ministerial level.
Yeah, so it's like a direct involvement because we were directly involved within this specific team within the ministry. We gave feedback on the writing and on the policy documents and stuff. But also awareness creation, of course. It was never our main goal because there's many other organizations that do it, but it's of course always a secondary process. I think what was a very important goal of us is creating awareness about youth participation in general, because we were one of the first kind of youth environmental councils in Europe. We're by this point also one of the older ones, and it's still very much a growing thing. So that was also, we wanted to share awareness about why it's important to involve youth on climate topics, environmental topics, but also many other things that we think youth have good opinions about.
And so why is it important to include young people? I mean, in your opinion? Because you could also say there's people in the ministry, there's scientists that do studies.
That's true. I think because they're very unrepresented. Because young people don't know the traditional ways of engaging with politics as well, i.e. they don't go vote as often. They don't know their ways to the ministry as people that have a bit more settled network tend to be. So I think by the way we organize our job structure in the policy arena, young people are always less represented, even though and a large part of them can't even vote. So that's also important to note, because there's also a lot of young people that are not 18.
Sorry, maybe a question in between. How do you define young people?
That's always a good question. We did anything up to, I think the official one was like 20, 29 or 30 or something. We never really used a very consistent part for it, because I feel like it's one of those things, if you feel like a young person, you are a young person, right? Yeah. So we're not going to say to someone, oh, you're 35, you can't join anymore. It kind of figures itself out. It's not really that we're only looking for high school age, for example. But I would say the majority of the people that engage with these kind of topics are like in the 18 to 24, 5 range. Within our organization, at least.
We talked before we started the recording, and you mentioned challenges in youth participation, but also is youth participation in particularly the council that you mentioned, is this really set up to make an impact, or is this just something that some people feel is nice to have?
When I was chair, this was one of the main questions I had for myself and for the organization, because of course I became involved at a later date, so the idea of the organization was already there and it was mostly set up. But I really had questions about, like, how do you do effective youth participation, and is it even possible? And yeah, I've also faced some challenges, of course, during the year with realizing that, and often realizing that it doesn't work. I think a good example is quite often you'll get invited to these events, and they're mostly events for like their conferences or something like that, policy events. And they invite a couple young people, usually no more than 20. And we always felt like we were like the token young people. Like they invite you and you're like, oh, go look happy and engaged. And then we can show everyone that visits our conference how well we're engaging with young people. And I'm not saying that all the conferences we went to had this, because there was a couple good ones, but there was also a couple where you felt like, yeah, why are we here?
I think this is in any way a bit of the challenge that you're facing with young people participation. On the one hand, the danger that your people or organizations invite them to make the event or whatever they're doing look more inclusive.
There's a name for it. It's like young washing, I think it's called. It's like greenwashing, but then with young people.
I would like to deep dive on the topic of, token youths a little bit more in a second. But before we go there, I'd love to take a step back to what you mentioned before, this generation test.
Yeah.
That sounds very, very interesting to me and also really relevant. So can you explain this a little bit more?
Yeah, I was not personally involved with like the intricacies, but the idea is quite old, and it's basically a legislative mechanism. Like laws already have to pass a bunch of like controls, and the proposed one would be that there's an additional control that the law does not like move any of the burdens of current legislations upon future generations. So, for example, some laws, they say, we save money now by doing this, but what they're actually doing is they're moving often environmental costs to the future. So that as people living 50 years from now will actually have the cost. And I think the main strength of such a tool is that, like, of course, we have a political system with 4-year terms. So on the short term, there's very little incentive to, that's wrong to say, there's a lot of incentive to move negative side effects to the future. Because your voters, it doesn't matter for if you're voted in or not, as long as it doesn't happen within the next 4 years. And I think a test like this could like help with reducing the effect of like the very short-term nature of policy. But it's a very difficult thing to implement because there's already a lot of legislative checks. It's already a lot of paperwork to get a law done. So there's some resistance surrounding that. Also, where do you set the boundaries? Like, what is, like, how can you measure such a thing, and how should the like certain damages or certain expected damages be calculated? Can a simple tool do that, or would you have to do a research paper for every law you're trying to pass? Like, there's a lot of questions, but I think the idea of it is very important to look into, and we've been doing that together with the SER, so the Social Economic Council, I guess. Like, it's a really big advisory body in the Netherlands, and JKB has been involved, so the Young Climate Movement. Translating everything into English here, sorry. So yeah, that's been a really big collaborative process, and it's very interesting to work on, but I wouldn't expect it soon.
And you mentioned youth participation is as a topic in the beginning. I think it's really hip at the moment.
Yes, everyone wants one.
Yeah. The question is it really working?
I would say right now that it often does not work. In my experience, at least, policymakers are willing to listen to you as long as it's within their comfort zone, and as long as you're not saying anything too controversial, they're willing to take your feedback. But the moment that your interests start to significantly differ from theirs, there's suddenly less interest to do youth participation. And it's not necessarily any single organization. And I also don't think that people actively do this like out of malpractice, or because they don't think like young people have the same valued opinion. I think it's just also like young people don't vote as much, so at some point it doesn't become as politically interesting to represent them as much anymore. But it is a very interesting discussion. How do you make it work? I think that is a more productive question than to ask, does it work now or not? And yeah, I have some thoughts on that. I don't have the secret answer, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would have been doing something else right now.
But it is something that you also, I mean, you see it in every area where people try to do something that is inclusive, right?
Yeah.
Also the European Climate Pact, which, that brought us here together. That's also an initiative that tries to gather people from all areas of the society.
Yes.
And yeah, my feeling is that there are at least some struggles to really reach everyone.
Yeah, no, we talked about this earlier as well. I think there's the way that the policy arena works, and especially like the kind of volunteer policy advocacy part of the whole thing, like it's very close related to class. And I think there's some inherent barriers that would be very hard to get rid of. Because if you think about it, the only people that have time to volunteer for, let's say, the Youth Environmental Council and spend like their hours talking and trying to improve youth participation and trying to improve the parliament, like environmental policy. And same can be said for the Climate Pact to go through like these podcasts and go to events and speak there. Like the only people that have time for that are usually students, because they have a lot of time and they don't have to, like, if you have the financial space to not have to work next to your degree at least, you can do these kind of things. Or people that already have like a good financial backing and a good financial position, so they don't need to worry about other things. So yeah, I think you can be very open to everyone, and I think that you should, but you shouldn't expect people to show up by themselves. We had the Youth Environmental Council, we really actively tried to be as like open to anyone who applied. Like at some point we had like almost no application requirements except you could speak Dutch. And yet it doesn't naturally come. Like the natural group you attract is usually university students that already have an interest in a topic, the environmental bubble, we would call it sometimes. And bursting that bubble is tremendously difficult.
And that makes it then very difficult, I imagine, when people come and claim that they're representing a particular opinion of a certain group, be it now young people or anybody else, right? I mean, how can we make sure that the opinions we get from representative groups or from representation groups really include everyone?
Yeah, it's a really big challenge. And I think that's not, like, often it doesn't happen in a very good way right now. But of course, you never actually talk with all young people, because the only people you ever speak to, or ever, but you mostly speak to people that are interested in climate and that are usually a middle or higher class, have like free time. And there's ways you can get around it, but I think the most important part is that you are aware that this inherent gap exists. And that you should take care to acknowledge it in any results that you have, and to be very careful with what you say when you're making general statements about what young people think, because I think it's a very hard thing to solve.
I think that's actually a very good point. I really agree with that, right? I mean, it is okay to have biased opinions, or we all have biased opinions, but the key is that we become aware that this may not be as representative as we think. At the same time, I do think that when we talk climate, when we talk environment, that the actions that people take based on maybe not a fully representative opinion are most likely going in the right direction. I mean, we all know it is a really good idea to make sure we don't put more CO2 in the environment. We all know we need to take care about our methane emissions and. So there are certain areas where you could generalize and make sure that it's the benefit of the bigger group that you're working for.
That's all. That's a very good thing to say, that there's a contrast of interest there. Like it's a bit of a dilemma, because on the one hand, of course, you want to improve the climate and you want to improve environment, and you want, as someone who works in the environmental kind of bubble, you want to prevent future climate damage, and so you want to push this topic really hard because that is your personal conviction. And I believe that this is also in the benefit of the group I'm trying to represent, but that is my own belief. And on the other hand, you want to be as inclusive as possible and actually be representative, but then your process is going to be way slower because you keep having to ask people for their opinion, and the opinions might not be as nice and streamlined as you want them to be. They might not be as convincing, because saying 55% of young people is interested in doing this climate action, it just doesn't sound as strong as a higher number, for example, or like a majority, or so. balancing this between like advocacy and trying to get climate action done, which I think the Climate Pact also does, whilst actually representing young people. It's a tricky balancing act, but that kind of goes back to the point also where it's good to be transparent about it. I think any route you take is fine. Like I think like for example, the youth climate movement, they're a bit more activistic. They take a bit more controversial standpoints, and I think that's completely fine. I think there's a high need for that even. The same could be said for organizations like Extinction Rebellion. Like I'm sure that not all young people in the Netherlands share the opinions that Extinction Rebellion has, but there's still a value in the agenda setting action that they bring. But I have problems when such organizations say that they speak like representing all young people.
How inclusive does our decision making on policy level have to be, right? I mean, we do have scientists that focus on different areas. Like when we talk climate, there are scientific goals that have been set forward. We have to achieve them, and I don't think this needs to be based on a majority of on a general opinion of the public. I mean, the scientific targets will have to be met regardless whether everyone agrees on them.
Yeah.
Because it's, either we destroy the world or we don't. I mean, yes, there are people who think otherwise, but in principle, you could make it as black and white.
And most people agree with that. This is unrelated, but a surprising majority of people actually believes climate change is a problem. It's often underestimated.
I think this is exactly one of the things, right? I mean, probably, like you said, a lot of people agree with that we need to do something. Not everyone has the chance to get involved in it hands-on.
Yeah. Yes. No, I agree. I don't think it should be an end goal to be 100% representative, because it's a bit of a Sisyphean task, so to say. Like it's an unachievable goal, and if you lose like your strength trying to reach it, that would also not be good. But I think, like from our perspective as a youth organization, what we did is like in developing this participation tool, try to be as aware of the biases and your positionality as possible, and then really try your best to think around that. And it's really hard. Like even writing in B1, like B1 Dutch is really hard already for someone who has been in academia for a while already.
Sorry, I'm not sure everyone is aware, but these are the different levels of language proficiency in the European...
So officially, the Dutch government aims to communicate in B1 level Dutch, which is really basic Dutch. Because a lot of government language, so to say, is just not readable. Yeah. And this really does not happen. What we really aimed at is going to places where there's already structures that are mixed, and specifically high schools, because the way the Dutch high school system works is that they're relatively mixed. Of course, you'll have some geographic differences, but compared to the natural way of engaging with people, Dutch high schools are quite diverse. So that's why we really want to go to many schools, because that way you don't have that people have to volunteer to give their opinion, because then you're already selecting. So that's our idea. And it could be one way to at least promote inclusion, but it's probably not the real fix, of course.
But it may be a step in the right direction. And it brings us actually full circle to one of the tools you mentioned in the very beginning, namely this...
the participation tool, yeah.
Yeah. I think before we round off, I would really like to know a little bit more about this and how the idea to develop this, came to fruition.
Yeah, so the idea, we wanted to have like a streamlined way of collecting many opinions, but in a way that you have as like little possible response bias. So because if you just put it online, let's say we put it on the Jongerenmilieuraad.nl and people can fill it in, you're only going to get responses from people that took the effort to look up your website. And those people already care about climate, and they're also not the people we aim to reach, because they are already quite well represented. So we were thinking of creating something that did allow us to easily gather data and work with it, but on the front is something that's very powerful to use. And for example, if you go the way we want to use it now, this was not always the idea. Use it as a tool in like a classroom setting. So you go to a school and you teach. You provide a class setup, and then during the class you use this participation tool. And the way it works is there's a bunch of prompts, and the prompts are animated with a nice, cute little frog. And the frog basically, it's something like, your phone broke. And then what are you going to do? And then there's a couple slider options of buy a new one, get it repaired, something like that. It's a really simple answer. There's a bit more like advanced ones in there. And the idea is that this will be then a bit more of an accessible way of gathering this data without relying on people to like take action themselves. We still have to really think about how it will work, and I think doing it in practice will also work. In discovering that we did one like practice class, or not one, but the first practice class I was involved with. You really notice how people want to give their opinion, and it's often different than what you think when you design an app like that. For example, one of the kids who was there, I think he was 15 or 14, he said something, we get sent so many surveys, no one's going to fill them in. So you also have to give us something back. And then we asked, is that money? Or, I mean, that could work, but also just value or attention was very valued, that you actually put it into a program, give some information, and go talk with people. Also, very important, I guess this is a tip for all youth participation, or just participation in general, communicate back what you did with it. Because there's so much advice and input gathering sessions, and there's many organizations that are guilty of this, including our very own government, and they never hear anything from it again. And that's just super frustrating, and people will do that a couple times, and then they'll stop, because they're like, this has no impact. Like this is useless. So this is also what this high school kid, that's not very respectful. This high school youth told us, and I found it very interesting because we had we're young people, we're students, and we had an idea how to do this, but it turns out that our idea was already kind of off tune with the targeted audience. So it's very interesting to work on it. You learn so much from just developing an app like that, about how many inherent biases you have as someone who's been in the university cycle for a bit. It's very interesting.
I think this is a great point to round off on, or to finish our talk, because I do think it's a topic we could spend many more hours discussing. It's challenging. It's really important.
I think one last thing to say is that it can't really hurt either. Like, even if you do it wrong, like, except maybe the only exception to this is like that you're trying to like youth washing, what we were talking about earlier, that you're using young people to make yourself look better. But if all else fails, it is at least a good entry point for people into the policy arena. It's nice for their CV, and it gets people engaged with like a potential working field. So that's already the base level. So if you are an organization and you were thinking of doing it, do try, but contact an organization that's already doing it and ask them how they did it. I think that is my advice I can give to anyone that wants to start a youth council.
But I like that you said, better do something than do nothing. And if there's someone out to ask, please do. So
yes,
that holds true for the European Climate Pact too, I think.
Yeah, of course. No, it's never good to reinvent the wheel when it's someone else has already has a setup. Perhaps it's there's probably also better to join up instead of making up a million youth councils, which is a process that is happening right now. But that's another discussion for another day.
All right. I think we're a little bit at the end of our time here. I want to thank you very, very much, Willem, for taking the time to discuss this definitely controversial topic with me. I think it's really very relevant in the area that we're in. So thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me in your beautiful studio in The Hague. Oh, and people should go vote.
You just listened to Willem Grootonk, who talked about the importance and the challenges of youth participation. If you want to hear more about the European Climate Pact ambassadors and their actions, subscribe to my podcast so you don't miss out on new episodes.